under that, like Chizurum explained, we'll be focusing on understanding payment processing data, and that would pretty much talk about the data fields that are sent. This is basically, like we mentioned, in the card payments, so we'll be understanding data fields that are required and are transmitted between one point and the other, and how these fields, enhance security, reliability, and efficiency in the card processing space. We'll also be talking a bit about the Nigerian card payment infrastructure. We'll be talking about our national central switch. We'll be talking about PTSAs and some protocols that PTSAs are in charge of. We'll also talk about Interswitch and the role they play in the Nigerian card payment infrastructure. Finally, we would settle on response codes in payments. So what response codes are, what they're used for, some very popular response codes that we have in the card payment space. Please, if you do have any questions, feel free to stop me. I actually don't mind being stopped, but because I'm sharing my screen, I might not be able to tell. So Chizurum should be able to help out with that. I know Chizurum prefers that we wait till the end of the session, but just if you don't want to miss or forget your questions, you can probably just put them down and we'll get to them. So, understanding payment processing data. First of all, we all know what cards are. A lot of us still use them, even with the whole introduction of, um, virtual wallets and all those other things, but cards are still an essential part of our transacting in our day-to-day activities or lives. So I'll just walk through a very simple card payment flow, an overview of that. So when, for example, you have to get something paid for with a card, there are a couple of core entities that are part of that card payment flow. And we'll just be working through them. So say some of us that still shop at Ebano in this economy, not me, but you go to a store like Ebano or ShopRite, right? And you get some items, you get to the till or you get to the teller, oh yeah, it's the till, and then you want to pay for all the things you've bought with your card. So you pretty much would be swiping your card or putting it in the POS or tapping your card even. Um, so at that point, you in the whole payment flow, you are the card holder because you're the owner of the card, you're the one paying with the card, and you're the one that the card has been issued to by your bank, right? The merchant is the one collecting your card data. So that's attendance that represents Ebano as the merchant is going to be handing you a terminal device. So it could be a POS, and you'll be putting your card in and putting in your PIN to proceed with payment. So Ebano in this case is a merchant, right? So that merchant owns a device that you'll be using your card on. There's also the payment gateway. So once that terminal has accessed your card details, those card details have to be transmitted to for authorization, meaning for your payment to go through. So there's a payment gateway right after your details have been collected on the device. And what the payment gateway literally does is that they handle um, transmitting of that data first and foremost. They do some validations um, and they also do some authentic encryptions as well of whatever card data you're sending. Some payment gateways also do some fraud checks. It depends on how that payment gateway is set up, but it's basically just the middleman for or from where the transmission of those card details starts. You have your payment processor. So payment gateway and payment processor are sometimes interchangeably used. Um, so the payment processor in this case is the one that actually does the processing of your card details between or orchestrates, I would say, the transmitting of your card details and that transaction as a whole between the different other entities downstream that would handle the payment authorization. So your payment processor would typically be speaking to things like the switch or the card network or the bank directly, depending again on how it is set up. The major difference between the payment gateway and the payment processor, I'll just mention a few. The payment gateway securely transmits, so it makes sure that whatever data it is transmitting from customer to processor is secure and encrypted and just safe for transmitting. Um, it also is in charge of capturing the data, so capturing the data from the device. Um, it pretty much interacts with the terminal device that you're working on, so the POS or whatever terminal that is being used to collect card data. So it encrypts card data. It's responsible for tokenization. Um, like I said, for some of them, they also do some fraud checks before they send the data to the processor, and it's usually sometimes visible to the user. On the payment processor, on the other hand, handles the actual processing, routing, and authorization with banks. So it communicates with the card networks and is responsible for getting authorization response, and it works in the background. So usually, a card holder would not, or even the merchant that is operating a terminal might not exactly interact directly with the payment processor. So moving on to the card network is the entity that is responsible for maintaining the cards that are being used. So we have some examples like Visa, the MasterCard. So those are card networks. So every time that a payment wants to be made, that transaction has to go through the card network most times, and then the card network routes it to the issuer bank. The issuer bank is the bank of the cardholder, and in most cases is the bank that, or is the financial entity that's created or manages the card. I would say created the card for the cardholder. So most time the cardholder has an account with the issuer bank. So if I'm coming to a store to use a GTB card, for example, then the issuer in this case is GTB, and the issuer is responsible for approving or declining said transaction. Again, because they are the cardholder's bank, that's most likely where the cardholder's account resides. So they would be able to, they're the ones that have to approve or decline a transaction based on different reasons. Does the cardholder have enough funds in his account? Is the card a valid card? Um, is the PIN correct? So all those things, is the issuer bank that approves or declines a payment. And of course, after an approval or a decline, the response flows back through the same entities that it flowed through. So it flows back through the network, back to the processor, and to the gateway. And of course, it's then that's what you now see on your terminal device where you say, oh, successful or insufficient funds or something 91 issue switch inoperative, that annoying one. So yeah, that's the flow. And of course, the merchant can then show those details to the um, cardholder. There's also another entity that is predominant in this flow. Um, it's just that the customer might not get a feel of that entity. And that's the acquirer. So the acquirer is usually the entity, it's another bank or financial institution, but that's like the merchant's bank, right? So it's usually the entity of an institution that is responsible for handling, in most cases, handling the merchant's accounts, right? So where does the money that the merchant collects go into? So that's the acquirer bank. And sometimes the acquirers would also be responsible for giving these merchants their terminals like POSs and the devices where cards are being read on. Okay, um, so some core payment data elements. These are just like very basic data elements that are transmitted during a payment or card transaction. So we have the PAN, primary account number. That's the very long digits that you have on your card. We have the expiry date. We know where that is. We have the cardholder name. That's also usually on your card. You have your CVV or CVV2. Those are the 3-digit security numbers that you have mostly at the back of the card. You have the transaction amount. You have the currency code. The merchant ID. The merchant ID in this case is the ID of the merchant. So that's for that transaction, we can identify what merchant was paid or what merchant was involved in the transaction. We also have the terminal ID, and this is again a unique identifier for the terminal that was used. So it's an ID for whatever POS or payment terminal was used. We have the transaction date and time. We have the authorization code. So the authorization code is something that comes back from the issuer. Um, so that it's like some sort of receipt to say, okay, this is the code that was generated after this transaction was authorized. We have the entry mode, which pretty much defines how the card was used and the environment it was used in. So by environment, I don't mean like if it was like a physical environment. So I'm speaking of if like the card was not present or it was present, was it used on an unmanned terminal or not? So all those things are part of what we send in as data in the entry mode, and they're quite useful. And I will get to that point, but just details of how the card was used is what we have in entry mode and what kind of terminal it was used on and the method of paying. So was it a tap? Was it a swipe? Was it NFC? Did the user have to enter a PIN and stuff like that? Transaction type is the kind of transaction that was carried out. So was it a purchase? Was it a transfer? That's just what the transaction type defines. And of course, the response code, which is also returned, like the authorization code. The response code pretty much defines the how the transaction went. Was it successful or was it not? And if it was not, then different response codes would give an idea of what exactly or why exactly the transaction failed. And that could also help with debugging and investigation. So just to touch briefly on this, we have different card technologies. I will call them card technologies because they are still part of the card payment infrastructure in space. We have the Max Stripe cards. These are some cards that we don't use very much anymore because they are not the most secure. They have a magnetic stripe on the back. We have the chip cards, contains a secure microprocessor chip for encrypted transactions. So the chip cards or EMV cards are like the upgraded version of the Max Stripe cards. They are a lot more secure, and that's what a lot of us use these days. We have contactless cards, and here we have those tap to pay that use NFC. We have smart cards, and this is also an EMV chip card, but it has some extra memory or logic. And then we have the virtual token card, and this is your mobile wallet versions of physical cards. So you have things like Apple Pay or Google Pay. So those are some of the cards that we have currently in the card space, or the card technologies that we have in the card space currently. Now, ISO 8583 messaging. So ISO 8583 messaging, or ISO 8583 is the protocol for card payments. And the messages that are sent between, so it's pretty much the same way you would send requests, right? You have sample requests that we send in REST APIs. For card transactions, then the protocol uses ISO 8583. So what this means is that these messages also have fields pretty much like we have in REST APIs. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with REST APIs. And these fields contain data which are very important for the transaction processing. So what's the communication between the processor and the issuing bank or acquiring bank where necessary is usually the ISO 8583 protocol. In some card transactions, there might be scenarios where, REST data is being sent out, but for the actual processing of the card request and authorization, the expected message type is ISO 8583. So I'll just be running us through some of the fields that we have and explaining them um, as we go through. So the first one is so DE here stands for data element. So we have data element 0 or field 0. We call it field 0 for a lot of us that work in this space. And in that field, we have the message type indicator. So this pretty much tells the kind of message that is being sent. A 0200, for example, means a transaction request, which is financial. This is the kind of request that that would be initiated when you pay with your card. And we have other types of message types. We have, for example, a 0100, which is an authorization request. We have a 0220, which is an advice on a transaction. We also have a 0400, for example, which is a reversal request, meaning we are trying to reverse a request that has already um, gone out, or a 0420, which could be a reversal repeat. So that's like repeating a reversal. So that's like advising on a reversal. We have 0500, which is for reconciliation, and then we have 0800s series, which is pretty much for system checks. So pings, echoes in the ISO 8583 systems. Um, we also have the message type indicators for when responses come back. So in the scenario I'd explained earlier, when the issuer is sending back a response, he would also be sending, or the issuer would also be sending an ISO 8583 message, but the message type in this case would change because it's a response. And usually the message type is an addition. When you add 10 to what you have for the request, that's what the message response should typically have. So if, for example, you send a 0200 transaction request to the issuer, the response that is coming back from the issuer, the field 0 or data element 0 would have 0 to 10. So that shows that this is a response to an original message. Same thing for reversals. So if you have a reversal repeat of 0420, then the response that is coming back from the issuer would be 0430, and so on and so forth for the different message types. Data element 2, we have the primary account number, which is the PAN. We all know what that PAN is, so it's an identifier for the card. Third, we have the processing code. So the processing code tries to focus more on what kind of transaction it is, right? So in a 0200, for example, we could have a 00, which is purchase transaction. We could have a 50, which is usually transfers. And so there's like a whole list of um, codes for the different transaction types within a message type. We, data element 4, we have the transaction amount, which is the amounts for that transaction. It's usually in minor. So by minor, I mean it's in kobo in our own case. If it's USD, it's in cents. But if you hear major, major means it's in naira. That's pretty much what it means. So if you see this transaction amount, even though it's 10,000, because it's a minor, we would be dividing by 100. And so this is 100 naira. So the transaction amount field is usually in minor or the lower denomination. You have the transmission date and time in data element 7. So this is April 29th at 11:30 p.m. and the 30th second. So if you look at that code very well, you can see exactly how to break it down. So 04 April, 29 is the 29th of April, 23 is the hour, 30 is the minute, and 30 is the second. We have in data element 11 the system's trace audit number, so which is the STAN. The STAN is just like a transaction ID for that transaction. Data element 12, we have the local transaction time. Data element 13, we have the local transaction dates. Data element 14, we have the expiration date. So that's the date which your card would expire. And it's also part of the data that would be transmitted in the whole processing flow. So for example, here you have 2612. So this is December 2026. You have the pause entry mode. So the pause entry mode pretty much is identifies how the data was captured, the way the card data was captured, right, at a POS terminal. So it's a critical field because it's important to the issuer and to some other entities that are part of the payment infrastructure or for that payment. So it helps us identify how the card was used. So was it a chip card? Was it swiped? So by swiped, we mean, did you swipe it on the terminal or was it manually entered? So by manual entry, we mean, oh, was it something that was called over the phone? Because in some cases and in some businesses, that's also an acceptable way to pay. So some people can call in and say, okay, I want to have an automated voice system, take my card details and make payment, so that's manual entry. We have contactless, we have mobile wallet. So it just helps identify how the card was used. And why is this important? It's important because it helps in security, fraud risk, and issuer approval rules. So based on the different modes of entry, right, there are different security and fraud risk rules that apply on the issuer side majorly. So say for example, um, the risk identified or the risk associated with a manual entry of a card is higher than when it's a card present transaction, meaning the cardholder actually walked up to a device with his card, because we know that there is a higher possibility that card information could have just been taken from anywhere and called over the phone. So in such cases, issuers have different rules around how they would authorize those transactions or what checks they would have to do in such cases. Also, if there are any fraud, there definitely are fraud checks for most card transactions. So for 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 example, manual entry, the fraud level or fraud assessment level would be pretty much sometimes higher depending on, or lower depending on the entry mode, which again, like I mentioned, identifies how the card was used. So it's also useful for transaction logging, authorization, and dispute resolution. So dispute resolution speaks to if at some point, a charge is contended, we need all those details to be able to identify, okay, how was this card used? If, for example, a cardholder is coming to say, I didn't use my card here, I don't understand this charge, you know, details about how the card was used. So if the card was physically presented, then we know to say, okay, this card was physically presented, so this probably is a card that you might have misplaced or somebody else has access to. So all those details are just useful for fraud risk, issue approval rules, dispute resolution. So there are different codes that identify how the card was used. This 051 is chip read, meaning like a card was actually present. For different regions or implementations of switches, these codes might differ. So in our Nigerian payment infrastructure space, the codes we use to identify the different kinds of pause entry modes might differ from, say, another country. So as long as it's understood within the infrastructure that is being used, then such details are communicated correctly from one party to the other. The next one is the POS condition code, and that's data element 25. The POS condition code is also known as the point of service condition code. It's a 2-digit code, as you can see, and it indicates the type of environment or situation under which the transaction was initiated. So it can tell the issuer or the switch if it was like a retail purchase or if it was offline. If it was from, say, an unattended terminal, like a vending machine where you don't have somebody manning the terminal, another special condition. So that's what we mean by the environment. Um, so why is this important? Pretty much like the horse entry mode, it also helps to define and apply different fraud rules and security rules on different transactions. It also helps with risk profiling because, based on the different environments that accepted this card, there are different things that have to apply. Also helps in dispute resolution and chargebacks because again, there's clarity on how exactly this card was used or in what environment the card was used, and sometimes in routing as well. Again, these codes are specific to the different infrastructures or regions that transact within a payments architecture or infrastructure. In data element 35, we have track 2 data. Track 2 data is actually data that is stored on the card. It's some static data and it includes, oh, sorry. Yeah, back. So it includes some data that is part of some of the card holders data as well as the card data. So it's usually present in card present transactions because like I mentioned, it's something that is read off of the card. It's stored magnetically on the card. And so it's read by a payment terminal when a card is used on it and it is passed to the processors for authorization. So it could contain things like the PAN, contain expiry year, expiry month, some service codes, some other discretionary data, and all of these is usually because it's just this very long sequence of characters, you typically have delimiters to identify the different parts of that data. So it's static data, like I said, read off the card and sent in the request. Data element 41, we have the terminal ID, which is the ID of the payment terminal. We have in data element 42, the merchant ID, which is the merchant number. We have the currency code, which identifies the kind of currency that is being used. So for Naira, we're speaking only Naira now, proudly Nigerian. We have 566, that is the universal currency code for the Naira and with the ISO code for the Naira. So field 49 pretty much contains the currency code. Field 52 contains the PIN data. The PIN data is an encrypted version of your PIN in transactions where the PIN is entered. So it's not available in all transactions, like it's not available in all ISO 8583 messages, but for messages that require PIN, or for transactions that require PIN, the PIN data is part of what is sent in the ISO 8583 message to the processors and downstream. Um, so again, your PIN is not set in clear, it's usually encrypted, and that's for security. So it would come as something we call a PIN block at Interswitch, but it's also called PIN data, and that's what is sent to the issuer for authorization, of course. We have the ICC data, which is EMV data for chip cards. So this data is dynamically generated unlike the track 2 data. And this is so that we don't have um, replays of card transactions or cloning of transactions, right? So because the data is dynamically created and transacted, the probability of transaction replays happening is lowered because then it has to be, because it's dynamic, it has to change for every transaction, unlike the track 2 data, which is static. So this is one of the things that um, the EMV cards have over the magstripe cards, in security. So field 1, 2, 3, this is also some data, it indicates around how the card was used. It indicates the technology that was used for the, sorry, I got distracted for a minute. It indicates the technology that was used in transacting. It's part of field 1, 2, 3. Or it is field 1 to 3. So it's pretty much serves the same purpose as the post entry code and the post condition code. So it specifies the kind of terminal that was used. It specifies whether it supports the EMV contactless or PIN. Speaking to terminal now, it specifies the data entry method, and it specifies the terminal location or environment. So it's pretty much kind of a combination of all those other postcodes that we had discussed earlier and some. Now, there are some additional fields that are part of ISO 8583 messages, but they are returned in the response. So field 39, data element 39, that is the response code field. It's a 2-digit field, and it's usually populated by the issuer. So in a request, you would typically not find a field 39 in the request, but it's part of the response that is communicated back upstream from the issuer. So it specifies if the transaction was successful or not, and if it was not, why it failed. So the different response codes would give you an idea of why said transactions failed. We'll look at response codes and some of the response codes we have today, the very popular ones, and what they mean towards the end of this slides. We also have field 38. We had also discussed this earlier. This is an authorization code that is issued by the issuer bank. So it's pretty much saying this is my stamp of approval. I've authorized this transaction, and here is a code for the authorization. Okay, so we're leaving the data elements behind now, and we're trying to focus a bit on the Nigerian card payment infrastructure. So a lot of us have heard of NIBs, we've heard of PTSAs, we've heard of switches. Those are the core entities involved in our payment architecture in Nigeria. Um, the Nigerian payments card payment infrastructure is designed for interoperability, and by interoperability we mean being able to for different facets of the financial um, of the financial community. We want to be able to have them interact easily and seamlessly. So if you're a card provider or you're a terminal, you provide different kinds of terminals, or it's mobile wallets you're into, or whatever it is you build for the financial community, our Nigerian card payment infrastructure is usually very quick to pick up on that and ensure interoperability. So that's why when cards came, we adapted pretty fast. When QR codes came, we adapted pretty fast. Even tap to pay, we've adapted pretty fast because we have some entities in our architecture in Nigeria, or in our payment architecture in Nigeria, that ensures that, you know, that goal is reached, which is interoperability. And we also have the ability to do real-time transaction processing across banks, fintech switches, and service providers. Um, like I mentioned, these are three of the major entities that make this happen. We have our national central switch, which is the hub for routing and settling domestic transactions. So that's like our national switch, the central guy. We also have PTSAs. Those are payment terminal service aggregators, and they standardize communications between devices and banks. So, like I said, whatever bank or whatever device um, is being used to handle payments, being able to work with that said device to handle payment data and go on to transmit it to financial institutions like banks or switches. Um, the PTSAs are in charge of that and standardizing that. And we also have switches like Interswitch that handle issuing, sometimes acquiring, and transaction switching seamlessly. So transaction switching really is all about orchestrating transactions, right? Depending on what banks or card networks are responsible for, or at the parties in that transaction, the switches are responsible for transmitting said transactions to the different entities or different financial institutions that are concerned in that transaction. Now, our national central switch in Nigeria is NIBS. It's managed by NIBS. I'm sure we've heard NIBS quite a number of times. NIBS is Nigeria's interbank settlement system. So they facilitate seamless cards, ATM, POS, and online payment routing. They switch payment data between issuer and acquirer. They are like a generally identified central switch, right? So they can do quite a lot. They are mandated by CBN to be the national switch, even though we have other switches. And there are some things that they can do, or there's some things that they do that the other switches don't have the license to do. But again, because they are the national central switch, they're set up by the government for that purpose. They also handle domestic interbank settlement, dispute resolution, and real-time interbank transfer. So the same way we have other platforms that handle transfers, NIP is also at the center of interbank transfers because they have connections to all banks, all Nigerian banks, and financial institutions, fintechs, switches. And so they are able to handle real-time interbank transfers. The name of their transfer service is NIP. So you've also probably heard of that. But they support only local debit cards. So Verve cards, which is proudly Nigerian, Naira denominated Visa or MasterCards. So those are the kind of card brands that they support because they are local debit cards. Um, if you would want to process, if you would want to use an international card, for example, that would not be going through NIBS because it's not a domestic card. So that would probably be going through VisaNet or MasterCard's network for that to be fulfilled. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about one of the major things that NIBS does when it comes to transaction processing, which is settlement. So settlement pretty much is giving to Caesar whom what is due to Caesar, right? So if you have a scenario where you have a cardholder, a GTB cardholder, walk up to a merchant to say, I want to pay for this, the merchant probably has an account at Access Bank, right? So ideally, what is happening in that scenario is the cardholder is trying to give money to the merchant. So money is trying to move from GTB, which is the cardholder's bank, to Access Bank, which is the merchant's bank, for that payment to be complete. At the point of entering the card and putting in your PIN and data being transmitted and response coming back with 00 successful, actual funds are not moved, right? Funds are just, authorization just happens. So it's not like GTB, the money has left GTB at that point and has gotten into Access Bank at that point. There are windows where the actual money movement then happens, and NIP facilitates that. So the issuer, the switch pretty much would be creating reports to say, okay, for this transaction, money is supposed to move from GTB to Access Bank, and this is the amount that's supposed to be moved. And those reports are what NIP will then, or NIBS will then use to handle settlement. So NIPS today has a couple of settlement windows. So they have, I think, about 4 or 5 a day. So it's at those settlement windows that NIPS then moves money from one bank to another. So like taking money from GTB to pay Access Bank. So at the point of payment, money is not actually moving. GTB is just deducting funds from that cardholder's account and holding on to it. Um, and then, of course, when money then moves, the money would then be taken from GTB and moved to Access Bank at settlement. Dispute resolution as well is another thing that is handled by NIBS. A lot of times when customers come to complain, oh, a transfer was done, I did not get the money, or my card was used, I got debited, but I got 91 issuer switch operative, or it was debited twice. All of those are things that make up disputes between customers and invariably between the customer bank and the merchant bank, or depending on the entities that are involved. So NIBS is a big time player as well in dispute resolution. So again, they're the central switch. They are the switch that have been mandated by CBN to handle a lot of these responsibilities in Nigeria's payment infrastructure space. Then we have the payment terminal service aggregators, PTSAs, and these are the guys that standardize the protocols that are mandated by CBN for terminals. So they ensure that all devices or standardize, a unified interface for POS and POS ATM devices. They ensure transaction logs, error codes reporting are consistent across all terminal devices. So this again comes into kind of sinks into the whole interoperability ports. No matter the kind of devices that are being used, there has to be something unified, a unified interface for all these devices so that they can be used with one another. They also support EMV compliance and encryption standards. So I've mentioned EMV quite a couple of times. I'll just like to mention what EMV is. EMV is, sorry, let me just get the full meaning of EMV here. So it's pretty much a global, worldwide security standard for cards, right? And it protects both the issuer and the banks, the financial institutions, and the cardholder as well. So so there are a couple of security standards that are accepted worldwide for how payment devices and payment cards should operate, so that there's higher security in transacting or transmitting customer data and even in transaction processing itself. So the PTSAs support that EMV compliance and the encryption standards for how, you know, the user cardholder data should be transmitted, the kind of cards the cardholder should come with or can be used on different devices. If based on transaction type you want a non-card card present transaction, a non-card present transaction, if a terminal should support offline or online card usage. So all of those things are just built into EMV, and the PTSAs ensure that whatever devices are being used are EMV compliant. They also standardize how POS devices connect to banks and switches, and in our Nigerian infrastructure, they are operated by NIBs. Then we have Interswitch. What is Interswitch's role in the payment architecture? So Interswitch actually is not just a switch, you know. They actually are a multi-role provider because of how diversified they have become. Interswitch for Verve, for example, is a card brand that is part of the Interswitch family. So in a way, you could say Interswitch is kind of into the card network space because they have a card brand. They also provide payment terminals as well. But of course, these payment terminals still have to conform to the standards from PTSAs, right? So they provide payment terminals and accept transactions from merchants. They also route payment data to the right destination, and that's where the switching comes in. So transactions that like purchases or transfers or payments that are coming from terminals can be switched through Interswitch. Interswitch will then hand over said transactions to either the bank or the National Central Switch, in this case NIP, or other switches that are involved in that transaction. So Interswitch acts as a transaction switch. Interswitch also provides settlements, reporting, and reconciliation services to banks. So because they are a switch as well, and they are in the hub of switching transactions from from one financial institution to another, they also generate reports for transactions that have gone through their switch, and they also provide reconciliation services to the banks. Finally, response codes. So like I'd mentioned, response codes are a form or pretty much tell you um, what happened to a transaction. It's part of the response that is gotten from the issuer. And looking at it, you can tell what exactly happened to the transaction to a large extent, right? Just like you have in REST APIs, where you also have response codes to identify what happened to a transaction, if it was successful or not, for ISO 8583 messaging, we have those as well. So 00 means approved or completed successfully. You can take your bags and all the plantain you bought and exit the store. That's the happy scenario. 05, do not honor. That's the response from the issuer bank saying do not honor this transaction. So that is a failure, right? And usually happens because there's probably an issue with the customer's account or something around just that transaction is not going to be honored by the issuing bank. So the merchant is not expected to part with goods. You have invalid transaction, that's a 12. You have 13 invalid amounts, meaning the amount that is entered is not a valid entry. You have a 30, which is a format error. This is not something you typically see on a terminal, but a lot of us that have worked with ISO 8583 messaging, when you are first getting a hang of it, you will get a lot of format errors because it's a lot more complicated than REST messages. It's it's a lot, but it's also really interesting. So you could have, there's a lot of formatting that has to be done, especially when you get to the more complex fields. Those fields I had shown us are just, more common fields that we see. There's like a huge host of other fields that are included, but for specific transactions. But those are the common fields that you would see. So 30 is a format error, meaning there's something wrong with the message and how it was created. 51 is insufficient funds. This is the one that we pray to never see when we get to the till, because it can be quite embarrassing if you don't have another card. But yeah, so 51 is you don't have enough money in your account. Kindly walk out the door. 54 is expired cards, meaning your card has expired. 55 is incorrect PIN. This is the one that's when you put it, get it once, get it twice, the merchant starts to look at you like, yo, where did you get that card from? So it's just saying your PIN is not correct. Go and return the card to the owner. 91 is issuer or switch inoperative. This is the frustrating one. This one just tells you something is down. Who is down? Is it the issuer or the switch? That's why the or is there. It's just saying it cannot go. So in most cases, one of the entities downstream is not responding. So that's when you get a 91. Um, and a 96 is then a system malfunction, meaning something in the whole system has malfunctioned. So the only time that you also have like a 09, which is transaction in progress. There are a lot of other response codes that we have, but these are the very popular ones. And again, the idea is that the only successful response code that a merchant wants to see before he gives you his goods is 00, which is approved or completed successfully. The rest of them are failures, and like I've just explained the meanings, they point at exactly why the transaction failed. And this brings me to the end of my TED talk. Thank you very much for having me, and I will take your questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Salamullah. Thank you for making it so easy to understand and really, really, really grabs, right? So I muted everyone just to ensure that we have some sort of orderliness. So if you want to ask questions, you can use either the raise hand feature or you can use the chat. So anyone, she has just few minutes before she, leaves us. So any question you want to ask? Anybody? All right, Oluwaseyi, you're up next. Let me unmute you. Just hold on. Let me do that. Okay, so you can ask your question. Oluwaseyi, can you hear us? Um.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can now.
All right. So during the talk, I don't remember which of the slides, she says when you use a card, money is not moved immediately. So I want to ask if that happens for transfers as well. Like, and if the money is not moved, how is it structured that the sender receives an alert and the sender is notified that the money has gone, and the recipient also receives an alert. I don't know if you understand my question.
Yes, I
Yes,
do.
well, that's fine.
Oluwaseyi. Chidrum, do I answer one after the other, or do I wait for all the questions?
Any that would be most convenient for you.
Okay, so I think I could just answer quickly Shay's question. So
Okay.
yes, the money does not move immediately from the banks. So if you're a GTB card holder sending money, and it also applies to transfers, right? If you're a GTB card holder sending money to an Access Bank beneficiary, for example, the request, when once that transaction is done successfully for a transfer, for example, the issuer bank, because they are the ones you're initiating it from, say, your mobile app, right? So your bank is aware that you're doing a transfer, and once your bank sends that request through the switch to and the switch then routes that request to the beneficiary bank, in this case, Access Bank. As soon as Access Bank responds to say successful, what Access Bank is saying is, I'm going to give your beneficiary, or I'm going to give the Access Bank account holder the money, even though I have not received it from GTB. So Access Bank would give the beneficiary money, and that's why the beneficiary will get an alert. And then GTB would then take that money from the sender's account, because GTB has gotten a confirmation that Access Bank is going to pay out. So GTB will take that money from your account, but that money does not leave GTB at that point in time. So it's not like GTB, somebody is running down the road from GTB to go and give the money to somebody in Access Bank to put in, the beneficiary's account. So the money is just held by GTB. Money is giving out by Access Bank, and at the next settlement window, the money that was held, which was taken from the sender's account and held in GTB, is then taken to Access Bank to recoup what Access Bank has given to their beneficiary. So that's the flow in the lowest level, or that's like, yeah, highest level. That's pretty much what happens. So it's at settlement that the money actually moves between the banks, but at the time of the transaction, the money is just taken from the account by the banks, um by the bank of the cardholder, or by the back of the sender, and money is given to the receiver by the bank of the receiver. Does that answer your
Thank you
question,
very much.
Oluwaseyi?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Kingsley, I
Okay.
think you can. Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. Can I talk, man? It's Kingsley.
I can hear you.
Kingsley, can I talk? Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. At least it's educating. The first question I want to ask, I work with a bank and I am building I'm working on their CBA. And then I'm actually at the point of integrating, building facilities for card. So the question I want to ask here is, at that point, if I want to integrate you, how do I go about it? As in, I know this presentation is not enough. I'm just looking at the high-level summary. Okay, we have whether you have a documentation I can access. That is number one, and then two, which other party, the production of the card. I don't know whether you people do Interswitch do card production. Then if you don't do, who do I relate with to be able to know the cycle of, production of the card, integration with our CBA, and then interfacing with you? So the third question is there a special application that is required to manage card integration or card services aside the CBA and the interface you are giving us? Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that question, Kingsley. Yes, we do have services that you can integrate to facilitate card payments here at Interswitch. There are definitely API documentations that can be provided and shared with you. Again, somebody would just need to understand the use case so that we're sure that whatever integration you're doing is the best that is required for your
Okay.
use case. So yes,
Uh,
Interswitch also handles card management and production. I'm aware of at least one group that does that. So what I would say, like Chizurum had said at the beginning of this, if you do have questions around integrations or what services you can integrate to achieve some sort of service or product you're building, you could always reach out, and those APIs and documentations would be provided to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kingsley.
Okay.
Sir ATSR.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, guys. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, so I think I have two requests or questions. So the first one will be that the slides, because I work with one of the PTSAs, so we're still working at the POS level. So I would love if I can have the slide for later review. And then secondly, now is that so Interswitch, yeah, especially the card integration. We're looking at crypto actually because I know the law has been hostile in previous years around cryptocurrencies and integration. I would love to ask like what's the overview from there, because I know if we're coming with a product that has like crypto, it faces lots of scrutinization, especially from Interswitch and Flutterwave. So I guess the general question is how is the appetite over there? Can we start integrating softly stable coins on chain or what have you?
Um, okay, thanks, Sir ATSR. So around crypto, I know that there are some R&D projects that are being carried out. But there's if those projects are available to third parties now, I'm not exactly sure. But again, I'm sure if you join the community, you'll be able to have access to all that information. And if there are services or APIs that are available for crypto integration, then you'll definitely have access to them.
All right, but I'm already part of the community. I think I'm in one of two,
Oh,
so I
okay.
don't know what particular, but I'll look for it. Sha. If you say it's
Yes,
around, I
Chizurum
will.
will definitely be able to help you with getting some direction on that.
All right, thank you.
Or having something you can speak to. Yes, thank you,
But the
Saitiosa.
slides though, are they
Yeah, yeah,
dropping the
yeah.
slides again?
I would be sending them to Chizuram, so she would make them available as well. Not a
All right,
problem.
thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Okpanachi. I'm sorry if I spelled your name. My apologies.
Can you
Hi, can
hear
you hear
us?
us?
Okay. I think we can go to Noah
Okay.
while maybe he
Hi,
gets
Noah.
started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. I just want to quickly ask, does Interswitch do they offer any mock services for payment flows?
Yes, they definitely do. For we have a lot of mock services on UAT and or sandbox environments. So yes, there should be
Oh,
something that you can integrate to and work with.
okay, so I would like is there a way I can just have access to it, or it's just for Interswitch alone?
No, these APIs are, they're created for the public. Like Chisholm said in the beginning, we have a lot of these APIs that a lot of people are not aware of, and that's why being in the IDC is important. So if you are part of the community as well, you could just, ask your questions and somebody will be there to provide you with APIs and documentation for a lot of these things.
All right, no problem. I'll do just that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Noah.
Okay,
Chizurum, I
so
think
he
Opanachi
has mic
says he's
access. He has
oh,
mic access. I've given it to him. I've told him just unmute and you can speak. I have enabled your mic. You have mic access now. Just try unmuting and speaking.
it
Also
looks like
ensure
he's
you
still having issues.
it shows I have enabled it. Maybe she didn't enable his mic when joining,
Okay.
but just try. So
I
Abiola
think
can go.
he has dropped off and will probably
Uh-huh.
join again. Abiola,
Okay.
please go ahead. Okay, looks
Abiola,
like
you have
Abiola is
mic
unable to
access.
unmute as well. So in the meantime, I think I'll just answer some of the questions in the chat. So somebody had
Yeah.
asked, first question. Can you please break down how money moves, say, from an MFB account, customer's account to the receiver account, explaining? So I've just explained what you have for banks, like how the money is held by the sender bank and the receiving bank gives money to the beneficiary, and at settlement, money is moved. So I think I explained that flow. What is the role of the MFB? The MFB in this case is the issuer, the MFB settlement bank. So the MFB settlement bank in this case is so MFBs, a lot of MFBs don't have settlement positions with NIBs because they are not, big banks or what you would refer to as commercial banks. So NIBs does not recognize a lot of the small MFBs. So what usually happens is an MFB has to go and set up a settlement position at a commercial bank. So an MFB like Kaduna Montessori Society Bank in Kaduna, right, might have a settlement, might elect a bank like Sterling Bank as a settlement bank. So what this then means is whatever settlements, the MFB would have a position at the set at Sterling, meaning they have like an account at Sterling. So at settlement, whatever money needs to move from the MFB settlement bank or from the MFB's position would move from Sterling, the MFB's account at Sterling, to wherever it needs to move to. And again, if money needs to be received into the MFB, it would be received into the MFB's account at Sterling Bank. So that's pretty much how settlement banks work for MFBs, because again, they don't exactly have positions with NIBs. A lot of them don't. NIBs, like we said, is a central switch. They are very primary to a lot of the transactions that are transmitted today in our infrastructure. And they're different from switches because they are government mandated. So they're a government body, or they're a governmental organization. So there are some transactions like POS transactions that have to go through NIBS. And there are some transactions like regular transfers that just need to go through a company that has a switching license like Interswitch. So sometimes in cases of like transfers, your transfers might not go through NIBS. But if you're doing a POS transaction, it has to go through NIBS. So depending on the kind of transaction that is in play, the transaction may or may not go through NIBS. But what's important is that a switch has to be involved. So the switch might be NIBS, or the switch might be, you know, Interswitch. But there are some transactions that would, even though they are switched by Interswitch, still go through NIBS because they have been mandated by CBN to go through NIBS. So that's what NIBS plays the role of a governmental organization, like a governmental switch. So they're switching themselves, but they are government elected. How do you prevent fraudulent terminals from making fake requests using the card details? So that's one of the things I had mentioned. There's something called the ICC data. Um, Depending on the transaction type, there are sometimes you have this attack called replay attack, where a merchant that's a transaction has been completed on his terminal would find a way to replay that request so that more money is moved to his account and taken from the cardholder's account. But with the new chip cards that we have, which are, like I said, EMV standardized, the ICC data prevents that replay attack from happening because the ICC data is generated dynamically on the card. So if the card is not present, whatever you're recalling or resending would not be authorized. There are some other things in the ICC card, in the EMV card standards that would help prevent fraudulent terminals. Like I said, there are standards that EMV have defined for how a terminal should operate. There are standards around if a transaction can go on with a PIN or without PIN. There are standards around, just a lot of standards in the EMV co world. So we have cards, we have terminals that have to work on with these standards before they can be accepted into the payment space. And a lot of times, a lot of these standards are being upgraded to ensure that less and less frauds are committed on cards and devices. Um, I do have some slides on AMV that I can share. It's just a whole world of card security and terminal security that, can take a while to discuss, but I could also share those slides I have with Chizurum, just so you can take a look at some of the possible fraudulent activities that can happen on a card, some of the standards that AMV has introduced to help, you know, reduce that to the least. But of course, this fraud still happen, and that's why AMV evolves year to year. Is there like a message broker between the system that notifies the banks just in case there's a downtime or issue? So yeah, this is what the switch does. Again, because it's an orchestrator, when transactions go from an issuer to the switch and then to an acquirer, the switch in this case is trying to communicate to the acquirer. That is the destination bank. And if for whatever reason it's unable to, that's where you see the switch return in 91, issuer or switch inoperative, and that's its own way of saying, or it would return a response message in itself to say, this entity is not available. So that's usually the work of the processor, depending on where the downtime is from, of the processor or the switch. Considering how often we see downtime from NIBs, are there any incentives to continue to use NIBs-based providers or to use the other providers you talked about? So NIBs, like I said, is a governmental switch, is a government switch. So there are some transactions that we cannot do without going through them, like some POS transactions, right? So, and even recently agency banking transactions. I don't know if you know what agency banking transactions are. But because they are government owned and controlled, some of these transactions have to go through NIBs. But there are some transactions that don't have to go through NIBs, and we have seen financial institutions, when they've figure out that NIBs is down, they switch to other switches. They have like 2 or 3 switches that they use. So that's usually what we find now in the payment space. So they don't just use NIBs. If NIBs is down, they can switch to, another switch that is available. Or if Interswitch is down, which doesn't happen very often, I should say, but if it ever happens in a blue moon and it's down, there's the ability to switch to other switches. The switch is always the first choice. So that's why I started with that. But yeah, but there are some transactions that, NIBs have to go through NIBs. And so when they're down, they're down. But they usually come up pretty fast because, a lot of things rely on them. But yeah, you do see that happen in systems. So can you shed more light on the switching process or system? I think we've discussed that. Can you explain how offline and online transaction works? So this would also, so that we save time, this would also be part of the EMV slides I will share. Offline transaction pretty much just means that your transaction can be processed offline. Again, it's dependent on the kind of how the card was presented or the kind of card that is being used. Online means it needs authorization from the issuer. Some of the customers used the bank debit card and pause, but the customer was debited, and after checking from Postilion, the transaction was successful. How do we handle this issue? Because there is no how we can log it on Arbiter or chargeback. So okay, so this seems like an issue around transaction processing and how to log on Arbiter for chargeback. So I think again, this you can get some help from the community here. There's a lot you can do if you have issues with transaction success and being able to log those transactions on Arbiter. So I'll just leave this to the community to get somebody that can help you and help you really quickly with that if you do have these issues. Okay. I think that those are all the questions we have, Chizurum.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm super duper grateful. Thank you for even taking out more time beyond your schedule to answer all these questions. So we're way beyond our allocated time. So just 3 things to note before we go. And yes, Folamuyiwa, we appreciate the ENV slides. I think it will be useful to a lot of people here. So I'm going to get that and I'm going to share it in the community. I'm actually not going to email anybody. So if you want to get it, you should join the community. And yes, for those asking for the slides for this section and recording, the slides will be shared in the community And for the recording, we're now trying to move from just uploading it on external platforms to, like, I think it's WeTransfer or something, I can't remember, to now our YouTube channel. So we have a YouTube channel, and once it's uploaded there, I will let everyone know. I'll email you, and I'll also share in the community so you can get it there. You can listen and take any other step from there. And then once again, for everybody or the people asking for our API documentation and all of that, I shared it already. But should you require more help and support, as I said, we have our technical support people that are part of the community, and we'll be more than happy to help you through any questions or issues that you have. So your best bet is actually to join the community so that you can get the best of help that you need. And what you might even need might be different from our business division. But if you join the community, then we'll be able to just connect you to someone else internally who will attend to your questions. And just before we go, if you're wondering, hey, what's next after this event? We have the last in this series. So if you're joining us for the first time, this is the second event in our payment series. We had one last month on the bit and bytes of payment, and then for Lamolua session. And then we're ending the last next month with a physical session here at Interswitch headquarters in Lagos. So if you attended the first and the second, you automatically get a spot for that. But if you probably missed the first and you just attended this, we'll open up a few more slots, and it's on a first come, first served basis. So you just want to keep your eyes out for that announcement in the community also, and via your email. And if there's anything else, I think this meeting chat will still be open even after the session. So you can always drop your questions there, and I will try to respond to all before the end of today. Thank you so much for Lamulua. Thank you so much, everyone else that joined and stayed till the end of the session. See you all now in person next month. And then the community is not closed, please. A lot of other information, a lot of other resources or activities that will help you solve the issues you have, or even grow personally and in your career, will still be shared in the community. But regarding events, I guess we'll see sometime in May, should be the last Friday in May. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day and the holidays tomorrow, actually. Yeah, bye. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And Kingsley, yeah, please just join the community so I can connect you with someone who would help you through the asks that you had. Thanks, people, and see you at the next event.